Welcome back to the Matt Borka Show, and today we're going to talk about something that has been on my mind recently, something called Millennial Hobby Energy. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, I don't know about you guys, but recently I've been really getting into all types of hobbies, one of them being reading. Actually, I used to read a lot when I was younger, and then that kind of disappeared in my early 20s. And then recently I just started picking up reading again. And I reread all the Harry Potter books. I just finished reading the Hunger Games trilogy. And then I started thinking, hey, what if I actually started talking about reading and pop culture more instead of business and economics, or at least like adding those themes to what I'm already talking about, since I need topics, and I'm trying to address the audience in a way that I'm not being exhausting. And that's when it really dawned on me, wait a second, this is exactly what millennial hobby energy is, because I was researching topics for videos because I'm trying to post more, and I literally caught myself experiencing the very thing that I want to make a video about. So having said that, today we are going to talk about millennial hobby energy, and we're going to dig deep into why it is happening, why it has actually become very pivotal for millennials specifically, because you would assume, well, what about Gen Z? Like, we're actually very close to each other in terms of uh, generations. Like, we're fairly close to each other, and yet this is a specifically millennial phenomenon. So yeah, let's dive deep into why this is happening. Okay, so let's dive into some numbers here, and also let's put some context around some of the claims I made earlier. So 50% of millennials have side hustles versus just 24% of baby boomers. Okay. And we also spend on average around $1,800 annually on fitness alone. Okay. And then the average millennial spends 13.4 hours weekly on side projects, which is something like that's actually super surprising if you really think about it, because we already have so much to do, yet somehow we still find time, like 13 additional hours besides everything else that we do, and we actually spend that on side projects. Okay, but here's the thing. Only 12% of full-time creators make over $50,000 annually, okay? So we're actually putting a lot of time and effort and energy into doing things on the side, but unfortunately, more often than not, what happens is we're not all making a lot of money from it. And that creates, obviously, an issue for a lot of us, because it would be one thing if we only just wanted to do these hobbies for fun, but actually we have this tendency and urge to monetize our hobbies. And there's a bunch of reasons for that, and we're going to get into that later. But just to set the scene, actually, our urge to monetize, we're actually not making a lot of money off of that effort. So maybe we need to be a little bit thoughtful about how we're approaching this, and how we're looking at hobbies in general. All right. So who came up with this phrase called millennial hobby energy? Well, it's actually a fairly recent term coined by researcher Anne Helen Peterson. Okay, you can feel free to Google the phrase millennial hobby energy and find her Substack. It's a really interesting read, and yeah, it's something that is definitely worth talking about, right? So yeah, let's dive in. So some of the things that Anne mentioned in this article she wrote on Substack, one example she gave is For example, going from growing 4 dahlias to 500, or from couch to a planning out a full on 5K marathon, right, within months. Yeah, so this type of behavior is really prevalent among us. Okay, so I also wanted to give you guys some personal examples. So, in terms of my entire career, funnily enough, like it all started out as a hobby, actually, um, because I graduated back in 2015, and I have a major in English and a minor in history, right? And then I realized, hey, maybe I wanted to be a linguist professor because I was super passionate, and to this day I'm super passionate about linguistics and in language in general. But I started to realize, well, maybe I'm not going to be able to make money off of it, or at least not as much as I wanted to. So I got into digital marketing, and actually it became a career. First, it was completely just a hobby, just an interest, right? Because I was always fascinated by ads, running ads, TV ads initially when I was a kid. And that sort of turned into a career for me. I also got into food photography at some point, which I heavily wanted to monetize. Unfortunately, it didn't really turn out the way I wanted to for multiple reasons. And yeah, recently pop culture and how I'm trying to turn reading into something I can monetize. And yeah, I've constantly had these, well, can we call it an urge? Sure, let's call it an urge. This urge of, finding ways to make more money. But all these things, for me specifically, everything that I've made money off of started out as a hobby, one way or another, right? It was never like, well, I have a degree in such and such, and then I've been pursuing that field. And I understand that, for some people it might happen in a different way, where let's say you have a degree in business management or something, and then you start doing something else, right? But for me specifically, everything that I've done kind of started out as a hobby, and then I found a way to monetize it later on. Now, for the record, most of the things I got into, I haven't managed to monetize, and it didn't turn into money, right? So I'm not saying that the success rate has been 100% for me, but it's good to highlight that a lot of the things that I've done professionally started out as a hobby. Yeah. So what's the science behind our obsession with hobbies in general? So the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows millennials ages between 25 and 34 have just 4.26 hours of daily leisure, okay, compared to 5.02 hours for Gen Z and 6.95 hours for retirees. But within those limited hours, we demonstrate the highest engagement intensity, right? So the data shows that we have limited time compared to other generations, or less leisure time, yet we are doing everything at a significantly larger scale of intensity for intensity's sake based on this. And there's a couple of psychological things here, okay, that I thought it'd be worth putting in and sharing with the audience. So studies show that creative hobbies reduce cortisol levels by 75%, which is pretty amazing if you really think about it. So it's actually good to have a hobby, right? It's generally a good thing, and I think generally, whether you're a millennial or not, you would agree that having a hobby is a good thing, right? But then, as millennials, we have this tendency to turn hobbies into something else, right? A 93,000 person study found hobby engagement directly correlates with lower depression. again, that's great, right? So what's the takeaway here? We have this tendency to self medicate with hobbies, right? So personally, I read a lot, right? I read 17,000 minutes only last year, right? And what I found is that reading really helps me to calm down, right? It's almost meditation for me, and I'm sure that you guys have your own ways to meditate. I don't know, like maybe you guys like going to the gym, you guys like going for a walk, or I don't know, you like gardening, whatever, right? Like crafting, like whatever it is. And I'm sure that you guys can also give like really good examples of this where, you know, you like doing something and you almost feel like you're meditating. But that's kind of like a personal thing I want to share here regarding the data I presented. So yeah, we have this tendency to kind of self-medicate with our hobbies, right? And then there's a couple of other things here. So it's a generally accepted thought that as we're growing up, actually hobbies play really important roles in our lives, especially when we're young adults, right? It's our having a hobby is our first chance at self-expression, right? But especially because things, when you're going to college or whatever, essentially everything becomes so competitive and focused on achievement that we have this tendency to, well, it needs to look, our CV has to look amazing, right? Like our resume needs to look magnificent. So, you're going to do a bunch of, voluntary work, which maybe started out as a hobby and then turn into that, or because let's say you play sports and all of a sudden because you wanted that scholarship, now the sport itself it's not for fun. Well, you take it very seriously because you need it for the scholarship, and then you end up being a football player or whatnot, right? So, yes, initially hobbies they start out as interests, and then they turn into activities we enjoy, and then that is when there's a fork in the road, and then the hobby either turns into something that you only really do to have fun, right? Or you're going to find a way to monetize it, right? Like whether, we're talking about sports or I don't know, gaming or whatever it is. And as I said before, millennials have this tendency to do the monetization the most out of all generations. There's also another factor here, which is gamification, right? Like our generation has grown up playing video games, and because of that, we're kind of looking at hobbies as games as well, right? Like we're looking for the next achievement, we're looking for the next milestone, and because of that, everything that we do offline, right? We will really gamify it and make it competitive for ourselves because we just enjoy that, right? But it also creates more pressure to do well, right? Because of the games we play, it's kind of set a standard for like how we're looking at everything in the world, and that also applies to hobbies. And here's a couple of other things. So Federal Reserve data shows we lost 13% of earnings between 2005 and 2017. Okay. Boomers only lost 7% during the same period. Okay. So what this ultimately caused is that we're constantly anxious about money, and I'm not necessarily talking about the 2005 and 2017 period, right? Because we are also anxious in 2025, and we've been anxious since COVID started because those years for younger millennials, like that's when we started our careers, and then for older millennials, Obviously, that also had an impact on older millennials. As a millennial in his early 30s, just purely based on personal experiences, what I can say is that hobbies, so we look at hobbies in a way that it's not really healthy for us, right? Because it is a double edged sword, right? Because on one hand, we want to enjoy the hobby, right? For the sake of doing it. But then all of a sudden we're like, well, can I make more money off of this? Right? You always have that thought in the back of your mind. How can I make more money? How can I find another revenue stream? Because we were pushed into it because we're not making as much as we want to, right? And if we feel that we're even remotely good at any type of hobby, we will at least consider turning it into something that can pay the bills, right? And if you really think about it, it's kind of toxic, right? Because hobbies are, it's supposed to be fun, right? Whether you're, I don't know, playing a sport, golfing, playing a game, it should really be about you relaxing after work. But then you're not relaxed after work because you're not making enough money. And because you're not making enough money, you're constantly looking for ways to make more money. And then as millennials, we are genuinely considering turning hobbies into more money for us. And I mean, in my opinion, it's not the healthiest, right? And then I think another important factor here is that we're actually not doing so well in terms of our careers collectively as millennials. And I'm sure that Gen Z could say the same thing. But as millennials, we're actually much worse at setting boundaries compared to Gen Z, right? And because of that, we we don't really have good work-life balance, I'd say, and everything kind of mushes together. And the fact that we cannot afford a house, we cannot afford to have kids, we're looking for kind of a way out, right? Like some people start drinking, right, which is not great. And I'd say the vast majority of us might want to avoid that, right? Or even if we drink, we want to limit it, right? Because we don't want it to turn into something bad, right? So what's probably the safest and healthiest way to relieve pressure and stress? Well, of course, it's going to be our hobbies, right? But then things have gone so crazy for us in the past 5 years that we're, because of stress, we're literally trying to turn everything into money. This wouldn't really happen if we actually have gone like actual pleasure out of work, right? If things were on the right track for us. Because what happens is we're looking at all these influencers on Instagram and YouTube and whatever, and all they tell us, well, you're not working hard enough, and actually, you're screwing up because this is what poor people do, and it's shit like that, right? Like it's not. I think when we're seeing kind of the veneer and the facade of what people post on social media, right? We also feel pressure because of that, but we're also feeling the pressure because in real life we're having all these issues. For example, wage stagnation is a huge problem, right? And millennials are specifically impacted by it, right? And yeah, we're looking for a way out, and it seems like hobby is one of those things. Okay. So now let's talk about numbers in terms of spending, and let's compare some of the generations here. So Gen X is currently leading with $83,000 in terms of annual expenditures. Okay. And then millennials, $69,000. Okay. But it's actually growing the fastest, right? So we actually have less wealth, but we allocate more of that wealth toward or to hobbies compared to Gen X. Okay. And then I have some stats here regarding fitness. Millennials spend, I think I mentioned this before, around $1,800 on fitness yearly, whereas Gen X only spends 1,200, and it's very typical for a millennial to spend $115 monthly on wellness versus $95 alone for Gen Z. And over our lifetime, we'll spend $112,000 on fitness versus $98,000 on college, which is super crazy if we think about it, that we're more than happy to spend more on fitness, which is actually not a bad thing, right? I think that's a positive stat. But then on average, if we spend $98,000 in college, right, it really shows you how dedicated we are to certain things, that we're actually willing to spend more on fitness than our education. Okay. And then there's a couple of stats here regarding gaming. So 53% of millennials have gaming subscriptions. We spend 22 plus hours gaming weekly, right? Which is actually super surprising for me because, I mean, I don't know what I was expecting, but what this data tells me is that we actually spend a lot of time on gaming, more than I thought. And a couple of other things here. The esports is like a huge thing. It's a massive market that is worth $1.2 billion, right? So yeah, overall, like what we can see is that we spend a lot of time and energy and money on hobbies compared to other generations. All right. So I have some stats here regarding collectibles. So 94% of people under age 44 are interested in collectibles versus 65% overall. Okay. And then millennials are twice as likely to collect sneakers, cards, crypto than other generations. The US craft market is at $43 billion and it's growing by 5.6% annually. And we're actually 37% more likely to upgrade equipment annually versus 15% for older generations. I also want to talk about some of the things that I got into in the past 5 years. So, for example, I started collecting pop art. I have a huge collection. I haven't monetized it. I did start talking about it recently because pop art has been so huge, right? But yeah, I really got into it. I really enjoyed doing it. I used to collect a lot of things as a kid, and to be honest, pop art, their target market is millennials, and they're actually being very smart about this because they're tapping into our need for having these types of hobbies and the fact that we like collecting stuff. Again, I started reading again pretty intensely in the past couple of years. Last year alone, I read for 17,000 minutes, which is quite a lot. I read tons of books, and the funny thing is, it's been both business and fiction, right, or something for entertainment. So not necessarily business alone, but I did read. I've been reading a lot of biographies. I reread all the Harry Potter books. I just finished rereading the Hunger Games books, and I also started reading the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the prequel to the Hunger Games. So yeah, like I'm a pretty avid reader, we can say, right? And then on top of that, I also started to play drums, right? But not only that, I thought about taking vocal lessons, right? But I said no. Like playing drums is enough. I'm doing enough, right? But that's the thing with millennials, right? We keep thinking about, oh, let's just do this other thing, but in reality, maybe we don't even have time, that much time. And yeah, like we're actually pretty intense, right? So yeah, I just wanted to share some personal stuff as well. Okay, So here's where things get really depressing. I have some stats here regarding how we think about monetizing our hobbies. 50% of millennials pursue hobby monetization. However, the median monthly earnings is actually just $200 from set hobbies, and only 8% earn over $2,000 monthly. All right. And the average time to first dollar is around 6.5 months. And the time to become self supporting is 17 months. Now, what does that tell us? Well, I just started to become more active on YouTube, right? Is it really a hobby? Sure, we could say that, but I'm seriously uh, I'm taking the channel extremely seriously. I want to upload more often, right? So I'm not really looking at it as a hobby. It's not like, I don't know, the equivalent of I'm trying to uh, monetize playing the drums, right? It's not exactly the same. I think one of the things here is that when we're thinking about monetizing a hobby, we're not really treating it as a business. So that creates all types of problems for us millennials, right? Because we're only thinking about making money off of it. But if we're not treating it like a business, then it's not going to become a business, right? And it will only be a side hustle, right? And that's basically how I interpret some of the stats here. Yes, we're trying to make money off of it, but maybe we're not applying the right strategies. Okay, I have some platform specific stats here. There's 8.13 million sellers on Etsy, and on average, they make $43,000 annually. And then only 26% of those people achieve full time success. On YouTube, just 3% of creators capture 90% of revenue. And on Instagram, micro influencers earn around $80 to $90 per post. So the issue is we're actually not making a lot of money off of these hobbies. We're spending a lot of money on doing them, and then we're not really we're finding it difficult to to turn these hobbies into real money. All right. So why are we keep trying? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. 49% want autonomy. 42% are just purely pursuing passions. 40% cite inflation as primary motivation. 21.6% now need side income for basic expenses. There's a couple of things here. So we don't feel happy about where we're at. So that creates all types of problems, right? Because we don't feel successful enough in terms of like a traditional career path, and we're not really seeing a way forward. We're experiencing a lot of wage stagnation, and that wage stagnation kickstarts this process of, well, if there's no way for me to make more money from my job, then maybe there's other non-traditional ways out there for me to make more money, because I need to make more money to live, to pay the rent, to pay my mortgage, to have kids, right? So we're all in. We're looking at all options, and because of that, we're constantly seeking new ways to make money, and we're not happy. We're happy to give up our hobbies to do that, right? So what are the hidden costs here? Well, this can actually lead to burnout. That's one of the things, right? Because if we already feel burnt out at work, and then we're looking to monetize the hobby, like whichever hobby we choose, then we end up burning out because we also have this part-time job now that used to be something very enjoyable for us, and we're trying to make money off of it, and then we're not doing a good job at making money off of it, and that will ultimately lead to more burnout, right? So it's actually a vicious cycle, right? And it creates even more stress. So it's actually really worth talking about it because, when I did my research for this topic alone, I haven't found any uh, YouTube video apart from one discussing this, and I think they haven't done the best job at that, right? Looking into the numbers, doing a deep dive. So yeah, it's very important for us to realize how toxic it can be when we're trying to make money off of a hobby and then we're not making enough off of it to be worth it for us, but we already invested in it. So it's it's we need to kind of think about like, okay, cool. If we're looking to make money off of a hobby, we need to treat it like a business. We need to create the necessary structure to actually make money off of it, right? Instead of just trying it a little bit, but then usually what happens when we just try, we just end up spending too much money on trying, right? And the money doesn't come back. So in a sense, I don't want to say it's uh, you know wasted investment, but purely from a return on investment point of view, it can be, right? So that's why we need to be careful. All right. And then I also wanted to share some personal anecdotes here. Uh, some of the things that happened to me recently, in let's say the past 30 days. So don't get me wrong, I'm also a part of this phenomenon for sure. I constantly think about how I can make more money. Uh, in the past probably 30 days alone, I thought about launching several offers. And at the end, I've kind of convinced myself that I want to focus on YouTube and I shouldn't spread my focus too thin, because what will end up happening is that I'm not going to be able to focus on YouTube. And that's something that I really want to do. But since I have a background in media buying, I spent $9 million on Meta ads, right? And I'm like, well, I can definitely monetize that more, right? Since I've been doing that for 8 years, why don't I do more offers, start funnels, whatever? And then it's just overwhelming, right? Because I see a lot of opportunities online, and obviously I've been quite successful at media buying, right? Because I did manage to spend a lot on the platform uh, successfully. But then after 8 years of doing this, I kind of feel I want to do something else. I don't like it as much anymore. And that's part of the reason why I started to take YouTube more seriously. That's part of the reason why I invested in more equipment, right? So it's actually like, it's not a bad thing, right? Because I'm doing more things. But then if I jump into things too much, right? And I end up spending money on them, and then the money doesn't come back. Not only did I spend time on doing the thing, but it almost feels like wasted effort, and then you feel burnt out because you ultimately didn't achieve what you wanted to. So it can be hurtful. So yeah, that's basically some personal experience, um, just from the past 30 days. And before we wrap this video up, I also want to come back to some of the things I talked about earlier, specifically regarding this pressure we feel, millennials. Some of the stats I have here, it's actually pretty scary, right? Because 69% of millennials experience FOMO, so fear of missing out. That's the highest among uh, any generation. And also, 73% admit spending money they don't have to avoid missing out. Okay? So there's this huge issue that we see these social media influencers and content creators, right, showing off their wealth, their bodies and what they do, and And essentially, we have this feeling like we're already doing worse than the previous generation. On top of that, we see all this content on social media, and we're already living in an extremely competitive society. So, combining all those factors, and then our anxiety surges, right? And then we end up spending money that we actually don't have because we want to fit in, and we want to feel like we're part of the crowd. We're also doing just as well as everyone else. But then here's the kicker: more often than not, and I worked with coaches, I worked with agency owners, and some of these people had successful personal branding online, right? It's never as good as you think, right? If you see someone on Instagram and they have 100,000 followers, right? And they post about their perfect life, how much money they have, and how good they have it. Well, guess what? If you see a lot of excess and a lot of money on those in those posts, more often than not, that needs to come at the expense of something else. More often than not, okay, it comes from your pocket. Okay, so to kind of make you understand like what the issue is, so the money that you're not getting because we cannot afford it, you're not going to get a pay rise, right? That's the money that pays for the excess you see on social media. And then you feel jealous, or maybe you think, well, I'm not good enough, or I don't have that much money. Yet you're the one financing whatever that excess is. And then you feel anxious, and then you're trying to recuperate some of that money, the money that's missing from your pocket, right? Because you haven't seen your wage increase for a long time because it's spent on things that are not necessary for the business, right? Because if you really truly think about it, and I've seen this many times because I've been in this field for a long time, the money is spent on the wrong things, right? So the owner might spend a lot of money on looking good on social media. Is that really necessary for the business's survival? Sometimes, but probably there are ways to reduce that, right? But they're not doing it. So they're hoarding the wealth. They're finding all types of ways to justify why they cannot afford paying you more, whatever. And then what are you going to do? You're going to start monetizing your hobbies because you don't have enough money. That's a huge issue, right? And again, I've been experiencing this in the trenches because I've been running ads for some of these people out there. Okay. And yeah, it's a real issue. And that's part of the reason why I'm trying to exit, because I don't think this is okay, because the money, the excess you see on social media is coming out of our pocket. So what can we actually do about all this, right? Because it all sounds very depressing that we're getting screwed over, that we're trying to find all types of ways to make more money, and as almost last resort, we're touching our hobbies to do it. Well, probably the best thing to do is kind of think about what you want to monetize, because ultimately, sure, you want to make more money, and you feel selling sports cars or sports cards is going to be a thing, and you feel you can make it happen. Sure, go for it. But then if you're also into gaming, don't monetize that. And that should be your, as I said, like meditation, right? Like something that you can do to relax, right? Or you go to the gym, right? And you like doing that, or you play basketball, whatever, right? Don't monetize everything. Sure, you can still do it, because I'm not saying you shouldn't, right? Especially if you think it could work, but don't monetize literally everything, right? Because you're just going to end up wasting a lot of time and a lot of money, and then maybe it's not going to work out, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're looking to monetize any hobby you have or do, you need to think about it as a business, right? It's a startup. And then unfortunately, 90% of startups fail within 5 years, right? So you have to have that mindset of, well, is it really worth doing it before I spend money on it? Think about it twice before, you invest thousands of dollars into, something maybe unnecessary. That's my point, right? If you want to do it for fun and if you can afford it, by all means, go for it. But don't do it for the sake of doing it, and definitely don't do it if you want to do it for social media. And you also have to think about how we can maybe reframe this, right? Maybe making money off of our hobbies is not the ultimate goal, right? We should enjoy our hobbies. Hustling all the time is not necessarily something that, maybe it's not something that we should do, right? So think about all the ways you can maybe relax outside of work. Maybe what we need to do is, instead of turning literally everything into a side hustle or a business, maybe a hobby should just stay a hobby, right? And it should only serve us so that we can enjoy ourselves. And here's another thing. Gen Z actually learned a lot from our mistakes. They have better boundaries than us, right? They know how to set those boundaries significantly better, okay? And we could actually learn a lot from the way they operate, I think. They're significantly more skeptical when it comes to hustle culture, and probably we should be too. So finally, I just wanted to say that I totally get it. I definitely feel that I'm sort of a part of the problem, I guess. I've been the victim of this millennial hobby energy, right? I've definitely felt the need for monetizing my hobbies. So I totally get it. But at the end of the day, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to look after our families, right? If you have one. And it's actually more important, I think, for us in 2025 to put more focus and effort on our health and well-being than just making as much money as possible, because that's what we saw on social media. So that's my closing thought. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know that it was maybe a little bit more stat heavy than usual, but I think it's important to talk about these things because this fascination with turning everything into money has really gotten to us, our generation. And I think there's a lot of ways we can mitigate this. And I just think we need to relax, right? And take care of ourselves more. And I think, maybe watching this video would be a first step in the process. So thank you so much for watching. Feel free to share, any personal story you may have that you feel is relatable here. And please subscribe to the channel. I'll be uploading videos every week. So if you're interested in business, culture, what's going on in the world in general, then this is the place. And thanks so much. And I'll see you in the next video.